So I'm going to start a series of 4 pieces. And to do that, I roll some slabs. And the question is it possible to imbue meaning in such a benign part of the process? And actually, is that even the question? Because it could just be, is it finding the meaning that resides in that process? And it's a question that I've asked myself when I was developing this work, as I used to slip cast forms, which is a very controlled methodology. And in finding ways that I could create a conversation with the material, I came about rolling slabs in the way that I'm about to show you. Before I do, I want to just bring up one of the big questions. The idea that we're in control of all the decisions and all the thoughts that we have is one of the bigger human questions, like one of the questions that is sort of at the center of the human experience. And it's not a question that I'm an expert in by any stretch of the imagination or address even too specifically in my work, but it sort of lingers in there, and especially around the idea of control, and like how much control of that material do we take on, and how much of it is a conversation. Yeah, this idea that like our perception is that somebody's steering the ship. In my mind, I have control over the words that are coming out of my mouth, whether I do this or do that. Like, I'm just making those decisions. But the other question is, there's the whole brain in the vat sort of idea that we're just like all living a simulation. But there's a more interesting question to me is like, are we simply a product of the particular group of atoms that have properties, and then in the arrangement that they're in, those properties have different characteristics, and then we move through the world randomly, coming in contact with different stimulus, and any given stimulus will elicit a predictable response based on our genetic predisposition and societal socialization, and environmental socialization, like everything in our previous experience plus our genetic predisposition leads us to take any given action or make any given decision. Sort of thinking about that idea, can I find ways in working with the material that are more conversational? I like to find ways that I'm manipulating the material where I'm not only telling it what to be, but I'm allowing its properties and its characteristics to have a voice in the outcome. And that's how I address that. So first step is in making these pieces. So I'm about to make a group of 4 sculptures. I'm going to work in this scale right now. This one's still waiting to be bisque fired. Yeah, I like the size. It's intimate, and I want to make a series of 5. So this is one that's already produced, and I'm going to start 4 more right now with you. Rolling the slab is the first interaction that I have with the clay, short of cutting it off the block and maybe wedging it if it's older clay. But it's the first interaction that I have with the clay to build up the form. And the decisions that are made here guide the decisions that are made in the building of the initial clay form. And what I do for the slab is I roll with a rolling pin, so I'm not going to use a slab roller. And all I actually need are a rib, a rolling pin, and a spray bottle for my process. And so I've got 4 sort of wedged and cut pieces here. And I'll start by just sort of like getting it a little bit flat, and then start to roll it out with the rolling pin. And what happens inevitably with rolling a slab is you get a stereotypical shape that's taken by a slab roller. It just turns into the sort of standard oval, whether it's coming out of a rolling pin roll or a slab roller. And what will normally happen is then people will cut out exactly the size that they need, and that's like dictate the shape that it's going to be. So what I want to do different to start to have a conversation with the process is give it little bits of water when I get close to the thickness, and then I start to fold over the slab as such, careful not to trap air in those folds. So just like if you're applying a sticker to something, you want to be careful not to trap air and go from the middle out. And so I'm just folding and rolling. And actually, I think I'm done. So until I have a profile, I'm just looking for a profile that is of interest to me. Like what kind of curves are created. So there's not cutting, but what's the profile doing? And it's sort of an act of discovery and conversation versus me dictating what the shape ought to be. And then so always when you roll a slab, so there's a little bit of technical that has to take place too, is when you're rolling a slab, particles are getting sort of pulled apart, like just stretched and stretched and stretched. And so you need to take a little moment to get those particles, those clay particles, recompressed so you don't end up with a cracked slab before you even start. So I'm just going to do that on both sides, and I'm ribbing in multiple directions. So there, and then that's it. So then that'll get transferred to a board, and then I'll start to build from there. So let's do 3 more. We'll speed that up. One thing I want to talk about while I roll these is the idea of the crossing point. MC Richards gave a demo that's pretty well known and talks about the cells of a tree and how there's a point where cells are sort of dividing and some move towards the system of the roots and the system that's in the ground that sustains the life of the tree. And then the other cells that divide and move towards the sky and bring, energy and from the sun and it moves up into the air. And there's a point sort of in the center that there's the crossing point that could only be the thickness of a cell, that there's a predisposition towards both of those directions. That's a very interesting idea to me, and one that I think about in relationship to creating these slabs. There's a sort of profile, a beginning, that is the impetus for the form to develop upwards from here. But at the same time, when I create the pedestal components, I start with the same profile and then design down. Like I don't build it from the top down, but I design the pedestal down to the standing point from this plane. Like it's the impetus for both directions of the piece.
Don't be afraid. Run.
So then I have all 4 profiles. And another thing that I like about this method, they're differentiated. It's like, if I threw 100 of these, they'd all have similarities, they'd all be so similar that you could discern that I was the one that made them, like they came from me in this, they came from this process. They're a product of this process, but they're also individual. Like there's not much discerning if you're cutting out slabs and you're using a straight edge or you're using a ruler, other than size, like you may be cutting to 3 inches instead of 6 inches. There's not much to discern the characteristics within that process. Like anybody will cut the exact same things, where these certainly have likeness, like they act a lot like fingerprints. Anybody can discern, like when I show you a picture of a fingerprint, you recognize it immediately as a fingerprint. But however many fingerprints we line up, there's individuality within the group. Like each specific fingerprint maintains its own identity. So similarly, all the profiles here and any one that I've ever made, they end up being similar in aesthetics, but they also inevitably have their own individual character. Also something that appeals to me in this process. So that's how I start a piece and how I think about rolling slabs. Clearly, this isn't a way that rolling slabs is going to work for people. It doesn't make a lot of sense to roll slabs like this unless you're trying to make my work, which of course we don't want to do. But it's the point of the video is to really think about how you engage your material, how you engage your process, because we ask a lot about why and often use symbolic meaning to convey content in our work, but we often also overlook how we do things and that how we do something not only can be a place that content can be, it's not only a place that content can be explored and embedded in work, but it's also forming the way that we think, how we do something and how we engage our work. I mean, really how we engage the world reframes how we think about things and can really be the guiding force in how successful artwork is created. So get out there, think about how you're doing things, and is it aligned with the work that you're producing, and is it aligned with the thoughts that you're having with the work? Go make something. Cool. Well, that's that.